Sorry, we started a little bit late there. Thanks very much for your patience. And good evening. First things first, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet tonight, wherever we are across this continent, on stolen land, Aboriginal land that has never been ceded. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm or Melbourne. And I want to acknowledge all First Nation elders who might be joining us on this call tonight and acknowledge that, yes, sovereignty has never been ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples on the call tonight and acknowledge the various nations that people are calling in from for this evening. Welcome, beautiful friends, to the Refugee Legal, not the annual dinner for 2022. We're doing it again. We're back on Zoom, baby. Everyone loves it. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday night to do this. I know, we're probably sick of these kind of things, but it's great that we're still doing the annual dinner. And the pandemic is not over, as I'm sure you'll know if you're reading the news. Something is still out there, and we want to make sure that this event is accessible and safe. And so we're going pandemic again. I hope you're all in your tracksuits and you've sorted out your own dinner and your own wine. And thank you very much if you chipped in a fair bit of cash to come along tonight to support the amazing work that Refugee Legal does. Tonight, we gathered together to celebrate the incredible work that Refugee Legal does in supporting people seeking asylum and refugees, and the incredible stuff they do fighting for refugee rights in this wacky, beautiful country we have that has a messed up system and relationship to helping people fleeing persecution. We're going to celebrate the victories. We're going to reflect and think about the fights that continue to rage on. And we have an incredible keynote speaker in the sports legend and human rights champion, Craig Foster. TVC. I mean, there is a small chance that in the madness of the Australia's success, unexpected success, the World Cup, that we are still just trying to 100% confirm and get onto Craig so that he can join us tonight for his keynote speech. We will do absolutely everything we can to make sure that happens. I guess we're asking for a little bit of patience and understanding on that front. If Fozzie is, I don't know, in a gutter somewhere, smiling ear to ear, you would understand why, right? Because they won. But we really want him to join us tonight, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that happens. So please stay with us, beautiful people. And thank you so much. 84 people joining us on this call tonight. You're all legends. My name is Tom Ballard. I'm going to be your MC for this evening. I'm a comedian. I'm a very proud Refugee Legal ambassador. I have a badge and everything. If you're not familiar with my work, I'm widely beloved and celebrated by all of Australia's prominent public intellectuals. Here are some of the reviews I can share with you. Last year, Andrew Bolt described me as a true barbarian. Victorian Liberals leader Matthew Guy described me as a pig. Whatever happened to that guy? I know the name, but I just don't know what actually happened to. Oh, well, I hope he's doing well. Chris Kenny described my comedy on Tonightly with Tom Ballard as juvenile and jaundiced lies for the signaling of virtue, that's actually fair enough, that one. Former Liberal Minister for Communications Mitch Fifield once described my work as beneath the standard of university review humour. Jared Henderson of The Australian once wrote, "Much of Ballard's stand-up is about as funny as listening to a recording of one of Joe Stalin's 4-hour rants." And after seeing me perform last year, transphobic academic and regular Sky News guest Holly Lawford-Smith wrote in a piece for the ABC, "The audience's laughter was to Ballard's joke what applause and chants are at a Trump rally." So, that is me. I'm Tom Ballard, a below-standard, virtue-signaling, Stalinist, barbarian pig who is here to drain the swamp and make Refugee Legal great again. A pleasure to be with you. It's been a very strange year, I think we can all agree. Is the pandemic over? Not really. We're still trying to get out of it. We're trying to move on. We had that big election, which I think was a bit of a significant shift to a more progressive Australia, which is really nice. But at the same time, we got a new king, and America went backwards on abortion rights, and Channel 7 announced that Australian Idol is coming back. So that feels like we're going backwards. And I don't know how I feel. I'm looking forward to voting for Kevin 07 to the sounds of Crazy Frog myself, but we'll see how it goes. Bit of housekeeping. I do have some apologies here from people who could not join us. I think I've done this bit in previous years, and it's an easy way to write jokes. So here we go. Obviously, all these people are going to be missed, and we're devastated they can't be joining us here at the Refugee Legal, not the annual dinner this year, but they pass on their apologies. Scott Morrison he couldn't officially be with us this evening, but he has secretly sworn himself onto the guest list. So hi, Scotty. Thanks for doing your best and for proving once and for all that men can multitask. Leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, is also an apology. He had a clash. He's attending the annual dinner for Refugee illegal. That's sort of more his vibe. I'm going to assume you're all laughing at all this, by the way. Peter Credlin is an apology. She's still crying over Saturday night's election results. Very sad. Pauline Hanson is an apology because she's in Queensland and there's a time difference and she got the time wrong. She thought we were starting at 7:30 and also she thinks it's the 1950s. So she was just like, not going to make it. His Royal Highness Prince Andrew was an apology this evening. Apparently he says he just gets nervous whenever he's around lawyers. I don't know what that's about, but it says here he gets nervous, but apparently the nervousness doesn't make him sweat, which is a bit weird. Kevin Rudd was going to come tonight when he thought that supporting refugee rights would benefit him politically. When he found that wasn't the case, he immediately lurched to the right and cancelled. Lydia Thorpe is an apology too. She's tearing down the M1 in a leather jacket to the sounds of Bad to the Bone. I love Lydia, but you know, I gotta make fun of everyone here. And unfortunately, Elon Musk isn't able to make it tonight because he's an insane billionaire psychopath and we didn't invite him. So those are the apologies. Screw those people. You're here. And you're in for a fantastic night reflecting on the year that was for 2022 and Refugee Legal and all the great work they do. There will be a chance to ask questions for both our executive director, David Mann, and our keynote speaker, which could be me. You could be getting even more bonus Tom Ballard later on, everyone. Stay tuned. Don't leave, please. Relax, enjoy yourself, have fun. No doubt, lots of people on this call are people who have done amazing work throughout the year supporting Refugee Legal, either financially, either by working for them, by volunteering for them, by standing in solidarity with the great work they do. So you deserve a nice night to yourself to have fun. And that's what this evening is about. If people want to give money, I haven't discussed this with organizers. I assume if at any point you want to donate to Refugee Legal, then you're very welcome to do that. I know you've paid money to be here tonight, that's fine. But if you just get overtaken with admiration for the great stuff they do, then feel free to go to refugeelegal.org.au and find the donate link. You know how to do that. It'll be fine. As I mentioned, yes, there will be a chance to ask questions later on. I'll let you know how to do that through the Q&A function in a bit. Okay, enough of my nonsense. To formally welcome us to this event, would you please give a very warm digital welcome to Refugee Legal's Committee of Management Chair, Claire Morton. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Tom. And just for the record, I was laughing at your jokes. I did think those reviews were a bit harsh, but good evening, everyone. And it's very nice to be here tonight. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, noting that we have people joining us from all around Australia. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm delighted to extend a very warm welcome to you all, and I thank you for your continued support of Refugee Legal. We're honoured to have Craig Foster with us tonight to deliver the keynote speech, particularly as we understand he has many commitments with the World Cup at the moment. I thank Craig and also Tom Ballard, our MC, for being so generous with their time and for their support of Refugee Legal. This year, in the face of the continued COVID-19 upheaval, we focused on the continuity of our services and the safety, health and well-being of people seeking our help, as well as staff, volunteers and other members of the community. Throughout the year, our ability to adapt and adjust and to do things differently resulted in expanding access to our services for the most vulnerable. Despite the significant impacts of the pandemic, we continue to promote and protect people's legal rights, educate across the community, raise awareness of injustices, develop proposals for reform, and take action for change. We also continue to strengthen and build partnerships and advocate at local and global levels for fair, just and humane policies. Over the last 3 years, the COVID crisis has put so many asylum seekers, refugees and vulnerable migrants at even greater risk, compounding their vulnerabilities. Nowhere has this been more dire than for people detained. Refugee Legal has continued to see and respond at the front line to many people in desperate need of our help and protection. As we continue to see the direct impact of global crises, a significant dimension of our response focused on legal assistance for people impacted by the crisis in Afghanistan. One key aspect of this work involved large-scale help to Afghans evacuated to Australia to apply for permanent residence, and we developed and scaled up a special clinic program to help with Afghans with family reunion applications. We also developed targeted strategies for people impacted by crises in Ukraine and Myanmar. The upshot is that all of our critical core services, our telephone advice, night service, our special legal clinics, full casework representation, and strategic litigation have been provided daily by our legal team working in hybrid arrangements, together with ever-growing numbers of volunteers from across the country. In 2021 to 22, refugee legal total client assistance was 14,146 people, and this comprised 5,971 telephone advices, 1,857 face-to-face advices, 2,376 people represented, and 3,942 legal clinic assistants. So really a tremendous effort. Through our work, many people have been granted protection, freed from detention, evacuated to safety, better protected from family violence, or have had their residency restored. Rising to these challenges was only possible with the partnerships and collaboration of a vast and expanding network of over 600 volunteers, 23 pro bono corporate law firms, the Victorian Government, Victorian Legal Aid, leading law schools, UNHCR and other international agencies, and our sector partners. Donors are essential partners in what we do at Refugee Legal, and I particularly acknowledge and thank our very generous philanthropic funders, major donors, and our many friends in the community. In such turbulent times, our partners have stood with us, helping to power our work, promoting and protecting the rights and lives of people seeking asylum, refugees, and vulnerable migrants. During this year, we also developed a new 3-year strategic plan for 2023-25. At year's end, with changing landscapes on many fronts, including political, policy, COVID, and international, we're strongly placed to respond to future challenges of escalating demand for our essential legal services. As we enter a period of reform in immigration policy in Australia, we are also strongly positioned to advocate for change underpinned by policies which are fair, just, equitable, and humane. Together, we will continue to make the greatest possible impact, convinced of the powerful capacity for our work to change the course of many people's lives immeasurably for the better and to shape systemic change. I thank David Mann for his strong and inspirational leadership over what has continued to be this challenging period, and for his focus throughout on staff wellbeing and also the wellbeing of our clients. I also thank David for the support and good advice he's provided to me and the Committee of Management. David has been well supported by a cohesive leadership team who have all adjusted to the changing times and worked hard to ensure the sustainability of Refugee Legal to deliver client outcomes and support their staff. I sincerely thank the staff at Refugee Legal and our many volunteers for outstanding work over the year, and I acknowledge their skills and expertise in refugee and migration law, and also in working with vulnerable clients. Finally, I thank the Committee of Management for their work over the year and for their thoughtful consideration and discussion of complex issues and for their wise advice. Again, thank you for joining us tonight, and I trust you will enjoy the evening. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Claire. Congrats on another great year. 14,000 people helped. More than that, even. That's fantastic to know. Thanks for all that you do and to the committee indeed. Just before I introduce our next speaker, I'm going to draw everyone's attention to the Q&A function. If you haven't done this before on Zoom, it might be handy to point this out now. Down the bottom of your screen, you should say a little Q&A section, and that's a place for you to submit any questions that you might have. Questions for David Mann, questions for Craig Foster, questions for me even. The most exciting guest of all. Got a lot about comedy, or if you have any questions, feel free to submit them there. We will have a chance for a bit of Q&A later on this evening. So have a look at that, familiarize yourself with the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll hopefully be able to get to your questions a bit later this evening. Okay, a man who needs very little introduction next. He is the Executive Director of Refugee Legal. He's the guy who's been doing this job forever and does an amazing job of it indeed. To tell us about the year in 2022 for Refugee Legal, the great work that they've been doing, and the big issues still at play for people seeking asylum and refugees in this country. I'd like to welcome Mr. David Mann. Over to you, David.
Thanks a lot, Tom. And look, I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet across this country, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Good evening and welcome, friends and fellow human rights seekers. And thanks to Tom, long-standing Refugee Legal Ambassador, for being our MC again tonight. And congratulations also, Tom, on your new book, I Millennial. Well, what a year it's been. And for the third year running, it's not been possible to gather in person for the Refugee Legal Annual Dinner for obvious reasons. But we still wanted to continue the tradition. And out of this has sprung some opportunities. And one of them is a wider guest list and a special welcome on that score to interstate and overseas guests. As Claire mentioned, during the year, the shadow of COVID continued to compound vulnerabilities of people seeking our help. We continue to do all that we do to deliver legal help. And while we did it differently, including offsite and online, we in fact expanded access to our services. So more people in more kinds of different circumstances were able to get our help. Tonight, with the changed political landscape in our country, we meet in a new era of real hope for real change. I'll return to this shortly. But amidst this change, there were some constants throughout the year. It was another year in which global humanitarian crises proliferated, knew no barriers, and reverberated locally, right here. At Refugee Legal, we continue to be called upon to respond to these crises by providing critical legal help to people in real danger and in desperate need. In the wake of the horrors of the Taliban seizure of power and reign of terror, we continued our mobilisation and major scale-up of legal help for Afghans impacted by the crisis. And while it faded from the front pages of the news, it did not fade from the front page of our plans. We assisted with the evacuation of people at imminent risk and pleaded the case for those left behind who remained in grave danger: teachers, aid workers, female judges, human rights defenders, journalists, and medicos, and many others. We provided large-scale assistance to Afghan evacuees to apply for permanent protection here. Thousands sought our help with family reunion through the Afghanistan Legal Hotline and the legal clinic that we had set up. Special projects of ours also focused on aid workers, people in the arts industry, female judges, and the women's soccer team. We work closely with Afghan Australian community members on priority needs and on advocacy, and worked in partnership to lift the Afghan intake, resulting in an initial increase which must be built on over time. The upshot of this work so far: many people have been granted visas and brought to safety and then granted permanency. Which brings me to the story of Asha and her family. Asha, an Afghan woman who had worked at the Australian mission in Kabul, was at imminent risk when the Taliban seized power. Asha, her husband and 4 children were granted 449 visas with just 48 hours to evacuate. In the urgency and the danger of their evacuation, 2 of their children, aged 6 and 8, were separated in the chaos and cut off from boarding the flight. Once in Australia, Asha and her husband came to us heartbroken and in desperation, seeking our help to bring their children to Australia. Refugee Legal lawyers worked closely with the Australian government to ensure the children were able to flee Afghanistan and to travel to Australia. Asha and her husband cried with delight on seeing their children brought to safety and reunited. And We were then able to secure permanent visas for the family. This was but one of a number of international crises which called on us during the year. On the back of last year's brutal military coup in Myanmar, our special Myanmar legal clinic delivered legal help and sought grants of protection. We responded also to calls for help from many Ukrainians fleeing the war and ran an all-day legal information and policy strategy roundtable at the airport with Australian Ukrainian community leaders flown in from around the country. With this work, for staff and volunteers, it's often said that it's one thing to be watching crises unfold on the nightly news, but it's another thing altogether as a lawyer to actually be able to do something about it now, something that can change the course of someone's life for the better. I now turn to indefinite detention, which continues to epitomise the depth of inhumanity and extremity of immigration policy in this country. Detention policy continues to be punitive, arbitrary, unnecessary, and harmful. It continues to harm people who have fled from harm, often severely. It continues to represent one of the great injustices of our times and to make perpetuation of other injustices possible. Throughout the year, we, in partnership with others, continue to explore ways to challenge the detention of individuals and to wrest back their freedom. Through our legal work this year, we've again secured the release of people from prolonged detention. One of these people was Hashim. Hashim, an Afghan Hazara man, was resettled to Australia with his sister in 2008 when he was a 15-year-old boy. Hashim lost his parents and was orphaned at the age of 6 and then subjected to years of physical and psychological abuse and forced into child labour. 10 years later, in 2018, his Australian residency was cancelled just after the birth of his and his wife's first child and baby daughter. Hashim first was detained at the Mitre in Melbourne and then sent to detention at Yonga Hill in Western Australia and then to Christmas Island, where he remained incarcerated for most of the next 4 years, thousands of kilometres away from his home, his wife, and his baby daughter. From as early as she could talk, Hashim's daughter, Farida, would ask on a daily basis, "When is Daddy coming home?" While detained, Hashim sought our help. And it's only then that he realised that he could apply for a protection visa. We helped him to apply, but for over 2 years, the department sat on the case. Requests for relocation to Melbourne to be close to his family were rejected. In the meantime, we took his case on appeal to the tribunal, challenging the cancellation of his visa. And earlier this year, after 4 years of legal battles, the tribunal overturned the cancellation and restored his residency. Within days, he was on a plane back to Melbourne and reunited into the arms of his wife and now 4-year-old daughter, with deep relief and overwhelming joy. This is the work we do. It's about change through individual legal challenges, together with advocating for fundamental policy change so that we can bring to an end for good this kind of sheer inhumanity. And it also underscores the profound contribution that you and others continue to make that enables us to do the work we do. During the year, through sustained and powerful legal advocacy work by many, including tonight's keynote speaker, the men imprisoned indefinitely in the Park Hotel were finally freed. We're also working with many others to build action for more fundamental change so crucially needed. While the government has embarked on detention reform, this is the new government, has embarked on detention reform, resulting in some people being freed from prolonged detention, what is ultimately needed are clear guiding principles and a systematic approach underpinned by independent oversight, and ultimately by the courts, which guarantees that detention can only be used where necessary and only ever as a last resort. And welcome, Craig. Tonight is a special opportunity to not only take stock of this year's work and of the year's work in general, but to also focus on the profound challenges that continue to lie before us and the ones that lie ahead. And what's clear is that for people seeking our help and for those defending their rights, major challenges continue. They have not abated. Across the country, unmet legal need for people seeking asylum, for refugees, and for vulnerable migrants remains endemic and is escalating. But with this, there is also the real opportunity for change. Whatever course this takes, we will continue to do all that we can to defend the rights of vulnerable people seeking our help, with the hope and the conviction that our work can change lives and the system. Which brings me to another story. Zenabek, an Ethiopian woman in her early 40s, arrived in Australia on a visitor visa 11 years ago. She applied for protection shortly afterwards in fear for her life at the hands of the authorities due to her Christianity, Amhara ethnicity, and her support for a banned opposition political group, both in Ethiopia and later in Australia. Her 10-year-old daughter remained in Zenabek's mother's care in Ethiopia due to her fears of return. Zenabek's protection case was refused by the government here, and between 2013 and 2015, 4 separate formal pleas for ministerial intervention were dismissed. Despite hospitalisation due to severe mental health issues, the department pressured Zenabek to depart on threat of detention and deportation. In mid-2015, amidst a groundswell of community support, Zenabek's plight made it to the front page of The Age. After sustained legal and public pressure, later that year, the minister allowed her to reapply for protection. But the department refused her case again, holding the public advocacy against her and accusing her of a contrivance to bolster her case. We took Zenabek's case on appeal again, and just last month, the tribunal accepted her claims and approved her case for protection, 11 years on. She cried with joy on hearing the news and knowing that she can now sponsor her daughter to join her in starting a new and secure life in Australia permanently. It's a stark reminder that our legal work and staying the course so often makes a fundamental difference to the lives and liberty of people in the face of injustice. And it's also a reminder of the urgent need for fundamental change after an era of inhumanity. In this new era, there are real opportunities for reform, and our agenda for change starts with abolishing temporary protection and conversion to permanent protection for refugees here. It also includes abolishing mandatory indefinite detention, increasing significantly the refugee and humanitarian intake, resolving the situation of all people held in PNG and Nauru and those evacuated back here from offshore with the grant of enduring protection, establishing a fair and timely process for refugee claims, and also expanding family reunion pathways. I want to just now acknowledge particularly the distress and despair of people subject to the fast track process and temporary protection, with the possibility of conversion to permanent protection, in touching distance, and yet they agonisingly wait for an announcement by the government And we continue to press the government to end the limbo and make good its commitment to grant permanent protection. We now have a direct engagement with key policy decision makers in this country. We have a seat at the table with partners to shape change and to ensure that the voices and faces of refugees are front and centre of this change. To this end, we will continue our significant scale up of policy and advocacy reform work with our dedicated policy unit, and every hour of every day sees every possible opportunity to shape and secure reform. This must include securing legal change where it's needed most, while ensuring that people are able to access legal help to realise new rights. In closing, I want to again acknowledge that we simply could not have risen to these challenges without the partnerships and collaboration of our network of over 600 volunteers and now 23 pro bono corporate law firms, Victoria Legal Aid, leading law schools, the UNHCR and other international agencies, and our very generous philanthropic funders, major donors, and donations from so many others. In such dire times, our partners have been crucial in standing with us once again. Thank you. I want to also make special mention of our volunteers and pro bono law firm partners who stood up right across the country and who have enabled us to expand the reach of our work when it was needed most. Once again, with Afghanistan and other crises, the surge in legal need has been matched by a surge in pro bono lawyers wanting to help, standing up. This is translated to hundreds of lawyers coming on board within days to assist on the front line and to make a real difference. The foundation for all of this is the staff and the board. And once again, I want to acknowledge the outstanding collegiality, the wisdom and support of our Committee of Management, and particularly the tremendous leadership of our chairperson, Claire Morton. I also have the great privilege of working with a truly remarkable and inspiring team of staff who drive our work tirelessly with such skill, such commitment, such courage, compassion, and deep humanity. Finally, I want to return to the question of change. We're at a moment in history where we can turn things around and rebuild refugee policy. We're at a moment where we can restore the driving generosity of spirit deep in our history and deep in our hearts, so that we welcome and uphold the human rights of refugees and make good our demand for a fair and compassionate society that welcomes and protects refugees. The time is right for real change. But real change does not just happen on its own. It's up to us to make it happen together and to be ever vigilant in doing so. Real and enduring change is so often achieved through providing direct legal help to individuals and the deep ripple effects their families, communities, and the wider community experience, and through direct legal action in the courts. Through not just policy aspirations, but fearless advocacy for major reform underpinned by concrete blueprints for change. It's also achieved through the profound connections made between people, between corporate partners, NGOs, students, the broader community, wherever it occurs. History shows that progress and change are not supernatural forces. They're determined by individual will and political will, our individual and collective agency. So let's continue to work together with the hope and the conviction that we can effect real change by bending the destiny of so many people in our country toward greater justice. That's why you and your support for Refugee Legal and those we assist is so valuable, it's so vital, and it's so powerful. As partners in our work, we deeply appreciate all you do. You do make a real difference. And together, we can change the course of people's lives for the better because what's at stake ultimately is not only the lives of people seeking asylum, but creating the kind of society that we want to live in and to defend.
David Mann, everybody. Gosh, it's so awkward with no applause or anything, but that deserved applause. Thank you, David, for all your work. Thank you for laying it out also clearly. And congratulations on those wins, on those lives that you changed through your work and through the work of Refugee Legal. Thank you for everything.
Thanks,
No, of course. I wasn't listening. I was reading this great new book that I just picked up by Tom Ballard. I'm Millennial on Snowflake's Greed Against Boomers, Billionaires, and everything else that came out yesterday. But, tonight's not about me. Also available as an audiobook and all good stuff. I'll stop that. I'm sorry. Tonight is not about me. Tonight is about our amazing keynote speaker who, thank goodness, has joined us on the call, and we're very grateful for that. I don't know if he might be saying, but he messaged me saying that he fell asleep, which is totally fair enough. His sleep patterns must be all over the shop, but he did awake, and he's joining us right now to give us his keynote. I will give a very quick introduction as much as I can, because he needs no introduction, because he's Craig Foster. He is Fozzie. He's the Foz. Following his decorated football career as Australia's 419th Socceroo and 40th captain, Fozzie has become not only one of Australia's most respected sports commentators and broadcasters, but also one of our most respected social justice advocates and human rights campaigners. Again, I'm sure you're very familiar with his moral courage and his amazing work, but it would feel remiss to not acknowledge a handful of campaigns in particular that are so relevant to Refugee Legal's work and the kind of space we're discussing tonight, particularly the extraordinary campaign to #Save Hakeem, the Bahraini refugee and soccer player Hakeem Al Arabi from a Thai prison, a campaign that Craig detailed in his book, Fighting for Hakeem, and Game Over, which called for the freedom and resettlement of over 400 refugees and people seeking asylum, all of them cruelly detained by Australian, PNG, and Nauruan governments. He's been a leading advocate in the Racism Not Welcome campaign for local councils right across the country. In 2021, he played a key role in securing the safe evacuation of many Afghan athletes and other citizens after the US withdrawal and the Taliban's rise. Craig is a member of the Australian Multicultural Council, an ambassador for numerous organisations, including Amnesty International, and an Australian committee member with Human Rights Watch. He's been recognised as a true Australian leader by the Australian Financial Review. He's been made a member of the Order of Australia. He's been nominated as one of Australia's best dressed men and was recognised in September of this year as the Australian Father of the Year. He was a finalist for the New South Wales Australian of the Year in 2021 and is the current New South Wales Australian of the Year for 2023. Congrats, Fozzie. Somehow, he is also an adjunct professor of sport and social responsibility with Torrens University, and he's also just joined the National Committee of the Australian Republican Movement, where he serves as chair. Oh, how the hell does he do this? Craig Foster is an indefatigable, fierce fighter for human rights. He believes that human rights exist, they should apply to everyone, and they should really mean something. And I've been lucky enough to hear him speak before. I'm really excited to hear him tonight. And I think I speak on behalf of all of Refugee Legal and indeed everyone on this call when we say how stoked we are to have him with us, especially during the World Cup, for goodness sake, a World Cup that the Socceroos are definitely 100% going to win. As a testament to just how cool, he's scoffing. As a testament to how cool he is, you should know that Craig is commentating the World Cup for SBS, but he is donating the fees for all of his broadcasting to the families of deceased migrant workers who built those stadiums and to LGBTQIA+ and women's rights organizations in Qatar. He's very busy. He must be very tired, clearly, but we are so grateful that he's with us tonight to deliver the keynote at the Refugee Legal, not the annual dinner this year. Please give a big fat digital welcome to Craig Fozzie Foster. Over to you, mate.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I see you've got over 100 people on the call, so that's just really wonderful. I don't have any idea how I was ever nominated as someone with any form of a minimal modicum of dress sense, as Tom said earlier. However, for the first time, I can say that I am appropriately and beautifully dressed this evening. If you just have a look here, you can see that I have my current Socceroos shirt on. So it is true, we are in the middle of this World Cup, which has its own immense human rights concerns in Qatar. And one of the key reasons why I decided to broadcast this World Cup in particular, rather than boycott, which was a lengthy process to try and decide what was best to make the greatest impact, was actually to be involved for this month and be able to talk about human rights. It's not often that sport is willing to talk about them. In relation to Qatar at the moment, it's trying to avoid its responsibility to them. For any of you who may follow the game or sport more broadly or human rights, you will have seen all of the rhetoric that's come out of FIFA in the last 10 days since the World Cup's been on, and their refusal to acknowledge their own human rights policy. So I'm pleased that I made the decision to, sit on air every day for a month and try and bring these concepts to life for Australians through sport, which is such an incredibly powerful social vehicle here in Australia. And by trying to have this conversation with Australia about, in basic terms, what human rights are, why they would even be applicable to sport, how they're applicable to the lives of every Australian, then I'm hopeful that we can build a different narrative in Australia through the prism of sport, which is bound through FIFA's human rights policy, to try and change that discussion in a small way. And then, of course, we can start to talk about all of those individual rights. And Tom mentioned those specifically, which are under siege in a country like Qatar. Many, of course, are also under siege in a country like Australia. And refugee rights are fundamental to that. That's one of the things that's driven me in recent years to continue to advocate as much as possible for refugees who are supposed to be under Australia's care, whether they're here on shore or indeed the large cohort who've been offshore in Australia's imprisonment system, and many of whom still remain there and in intense pain. And that is because this is one of the areas where we have fallen so very, very short. And despite being signatories to the Refugee Convention, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, would know on this call, we have actually legislated away as many of our obligations as was possible in recent years. And it's time that we started to claw some of those back. So it was a pretty big night overnight. The Socceroos have had what was just a staggering win against Denmark, and they now go into a game against Argentina on Sunday morning. So I'm sorry that I joined a little bit late. I did fall asleep. I do admit that. I've been doing a lot of media all day, and so thank you. The reason I know that this is a very, very important, firstly, I know David Mann, I know the incredible work the Refugee Legal does, and that's why I'm here in the stupefied state that I'm in. Secondly, the reason I know how popular the work is and how important it is and how well supported it is and how many people are advocating for it is the incredible number of texts and calls that I just got in the last half hour that woke me up. So thank you, everyone. I must have about 150 calls here. So I know just about everyone on this call, I think, and everyone was just calling and texting and buzzing and doing everything they possibly could to say, come on, you've got to get on. So having said all that, as a brief intro, I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'll just make a few quick points. I won't spend a huge amount of time with you, but I just really wanted to thank David and the work the Refugee Legal do, and just add my support. That's all. Come on here to say thank you, everyone, for supporting it. Thank you for giving, and tonight is important to make sure that we continue to fund the incredibly important work. And it is important for the individual stories, but it's also important for who we are as Australians, who we purport to be as Australians, and I guess most importantly, who we'd love to be and who we want to become. I'll just start with this, go back to the Socceroos for a moment. We have at least 3 South Sudanese refugees playing for the Socceroos, one of whom in the squad, a 26-man squad, one of whom has played in the second game by the name of Awem Abil. And that's also important because it demonstrates the polarity or the kind of cognitive dissonance that we have or have had in Australia. I think it's gradually changing now, and the new government, Albanese government, and with Andrew Giles, who's clearly taken some really positive steps, have assisted to start to change that. It's not enough. We need more, and we need, of course, to keep the pressure on Andrew and on Anthony to continue to make sure that we live up to all of our commitments, not just those that are politically expedient at any point in time. And that's why the sector is so very, very important, is because it's your responsibility and it's my responsibility to say, you know, we get that's what Australia is capable of accepting now, or what, you know, you might think is politically possible, but these are people. These are people who are being harmed, and these are people who are in deep trouble and have been deeply traumatized, and we have a responsibility, and we will not abrogate that responsibility, and we'll continue to call on you to live up to that. That's very, very important. I can't stress that enough. And at the moment, it's perhaps in some ways more difficult than 12 months ago, because it was very easy for the whole sector to rail and rally against a situation which was so horrible and which was so obviously flawed. Now, because there've been some really welcome positive steps, it takes strong organisations to be able to publicly and privately say, look, we really support those. That's fantastic work. Thank you. However, that's not enough. We need these elements over here. Now, what sport does, and we saw this in the Hakeem El Arabi case that Tom referenced, was it provides a kind of patina around people, refugees, that others lack, and provides them opportunities to become humanised. And so we used that, I think, to everyone's advantage during the Game Over campaign with Graham Tom, who's I know is on the call, because he was pestering me to get up in the last half hour, and around the medevac refugees and everyone who was and still remains offshore. And that's important because we've got Awe Mobile and Thomas Deng and Garain Kuol now, who's only 18 years old, has barely started a game in Australian professional football, and yet sits on the bench and came on in the first game, actually against France in the World Cup. And Australia looks at them and says, wow, what incredible athletes. These guys are amazing. They're one of us. And, we love them because they wear the green and gold. And so the opportunity is there this month to say, yeah, that's totally cool. But actually, these guys are exactly the same as Farhad Bandesh or Moz Azimi, my very close friends, or any of the other medevac refugees. They're the same as everyone who's still stuck offshore. And indeed, they're the same as anyone who still, is fleeing persecution both here and around the world. And we need to stand up for all of them. So, we've created an ability in this country to separate the good from the bad, the worthy from the unworthy, and sport provides this patina of worthiness. And if we can somehow work out how to use that to the benefit of our broader human rights commitments, I think that will be very, very important. It's also a time when Australia needs to live up to our human rights commitments, I think, more than ever before. One of the interesting things about the World Cup in Qatar has been how that country, aided by the awful, I would say, for want of a better word, FIFA President Gianni Infantino, whose commentary on their obligations to their own human rights policy and unwillingness to live up to that in relation to migrant workers and LGBTI criminalisation in Qatar. And he tried to characterise that as a case of morality, Western morality against East, and ideology rather than universal human rights. Which has, I think, done huge damage to the narrative on human rights all around the world, because it's allowed, our Arabic and Islamic community in the Middle East to be able to, maintain that kind of victimhood narrative rather than being held accountable to the actual harm that's occurred. Now, the reason that it's important is Qatar are now, through this World Cup, pushing back in the same way that we've seen China do, for example, recently. And that is by saying, well, yes, we have some problems, but in the West, you have all of these. You've done all these things in the past, and therefore, we're not going to be lectured by you. And we've seen that type of diplomacy, wolf diplomacy from China in recent years as well, and including in relation to Australia. And so, in light of that, it's vital for Australia and all of us to realise that we actually need to get our own house in order to be able to further the rights of people all around the world. And therefore, whether it's Indigenous rights or refugee rights, or women's rights, and our slide down the global gender gap index in the last 15 years, all of these issues are wonderful opportunities for us to say, well, we recognise that we need to live up to our responsibilities to a greater degree. We're going to do that, and by doing that, we know now that we can actually be in a stronger position to hold countries like China, for example, the CCP, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others accountable. And that's going to be very, very important in a whole range of issues, particularly in relation to social surveillance, and the social credit scores, and all of and freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and all of these things we see under siege all around the world. So I see Australia as a wonderful opportunity to be a beacon of human rights around the world. That's one reason why I'm sure all of you agree that the voice to Parliament is a critical step forward for us, because it's another step in our journey to respecting the human rights of our Indigenous peoples. And that's fundamental. In fact, I would say that's the first step to eventually getting to a place where we can demonstrate to the world that we live multiculturalism in a genuine way, and that means providing equality for everyone and human rights for all. So sport at the moment is actually very much at the forefront of a soft power and of the pushback against human rights. And China, for example, hosting the Beijing Winter Olympics and then saying, well, this is our version of human rights, and actually wanting to recreate what they see as a uniquely Chinese version of human rights, of course, which simply can't be allowed to happen, because we know what it looks like. So refugee rights in Australia are far more important than just helping the individuals involved, as critically valuable as that is for all of us. And I keep saying to Australia, when we can humanise people, when we humanise Farhad and Moz and others, Australia responds, because they automatically can feel, well, hang on a minute, if I was in that situation, what is it that I would like to do? And Afghanistan that Tom mentioned is an important aspect there as well. We were able, with a whole range of people, MPs and Zali Steggall and Nick McKim, and we've got Alison Batterson from Human Rights for All, is just an incredibly strong, brilliant advocate, and Nikki Dryden, who's an ex-Olympic swimmer, who's also a human rights lawyer, and just amazing former sports people in the human rights space, who all worked on the case to bring out the Afghan women's national team. And they've become a global symbol for women's rights all around the world. But what's also important about that case is that it allows us and me to say to Australia, when I'm in the corporate rooms and when I'm in governmental rooms and I'm in academia and I'm in schools and so on, and what I say to them is, what was interesting about Afghanistan, one of the most interesting aspects to that from my perspective was that, Australians were caught there, and many Australians and all of this community would have been involved in doing extraordinary work. But when the airport closed, we had Australians who were stuck in Afghanistan and needed to get out. And so I say to people, well, that's your country, people. And just put yourself in their position. Let's say that it was your daughter or your son or your wife or your husband or yourself. And you were in academics, perhaps you were a professor at, Afghan university on secondment or some such thing. You happened to be working there. And then the Taliban took over and all of a sudden the airport was closed. You couldn't get on one of the flights. What are you going to do? And people just look and say, well, I need the hell out. I say to them, yeah, that's right. That's what I'd do. And if it was my family, I'd get them out. Would you get them out? Oh, well, I do. Well, what would you do to get them out? Well, I'd do anything. Well, of course you would. Yeah. And would that include, getting across the mountains and getting yourself in the back of a crate or would it include paying security people in order to get you across the border, for example? Oh yeah, I'd do that for sure. So would I. And that's what happened. And I know because I was here helping to raise money for people to do that. And so it's important to talk to Australia about the complexity of human mobility and human migration and forced migration, and that it's not these simplistic narratives about people just using smugglers without understanding the context that puts people in that situation, and having this nuanced discussion that perhaps now and in future next few years I'm more confident that we're going to be able to have, is to let's talk about this, how Australians use people smugglers in Afghanistan to get out. Now, that's not condoning it. That is understanding the reality of what people have to go through. And by understanding the reality, we can now start to at least have a discussion about how we can create a better global compact to make sure that people smugglers don't have to be involved, which they currently do to get people across borders. And so how can we solve that issue? That's a great question, I say to them. Well, now let's have that discussion. And because we're now starting to finally, once again, respect our own obligations under our own refugee convention as signatories, now we can start to be involved in that discussion instead of removing ourselves from us, trying to destroy the compact and putting barriers up, walls up and imprisoning people. No, we can actually lead here. We can actually guide this discussion because we have been at the center of that. We have seen many, many deaths, because of our own response to something that shouldn't have to occur, but is going to occur more frequently in future. And when you look at human migration, both internally and across borders in relation to climate change. That's why this is so critically important now. We need to understand it more. We need to talk about it. We need to engage in multilateral organizations globally. We need Andrew Giles to take the lead on that. And I must say, he does have a very strong history. He certainly does feel very strongly about it. And I think the government is in a good position there with Andrew advocating these. Of course, we all need to still be hammering on him to help everyone. Okay, we all get that. But we're in a position where we can actually engage in those conversations now, and that's incredibly important. We've all seen the value of freedom. I just finished by talking about, I mentioned my friend Moz. They've become very close, love friends of mine, 2 Kurdish refugees who were so traumatized and terrorized by Australia on Manus Island and who now live here. Farhad's down in Melbourne and he has his own basically wine. He with his partner, he makes freedom wine and time to fly wine. Time to fly. Why? Is because he was behind the wire for so many years and he would see the birds flying up over free. And he came to know better than any of us what freedom actually means. And in my discussions with him over many months and now years, I came to understand the freedoms that we take for granted in Australia, but that we've been denying other people. And that is a crazy position to be in. We've created this quite extraordinary country where we have many challenges, but it is a very, very amazing place, unique in many ways. And yet, those things that we hold so dear, so precious, we have been prepared to destroy for other innocent human beings. That can no longer be the case. I've seen the value of freedom and I know the value of those who fight for it. And that is a refugee legal, everyone on this call, and every human rights lawyer around the country. It's extraordinary what you do. I'm able to go sit on a couch, talk about the Socceroos, have fun, and do a whole range of things, and then just come back and lend my voice to these issues, when I feel they're necessary. Whereas you guys are working day in, day out on really complex cases, often fighting against insurmountable odds with human beings on one side of the ledger, which is an unfair ledger, and you're trying to right that to make that equal on behalf of people who are in so much pain. I congratulate you. I'm in awe at what you do. I think it's absolutely awesome. Without it, Australia would still be going in the wrong direction, because there's so many of you all around the country. We're now finally starting to head in the right way. There's a lot more work to do, but you are very much at the heart of it. I thank you all. Thank you for your time. Please give generously. We all need to make sure that this work continues, not just for the people, but for you and for I. Thank you very much.
Craig Foster, everybody. Gosh, if that's you stupefied or just woken up from a nap, I hate to think what you're like when you're on fully awake. That was beautifully put. That was from the heart, and a lovely summation of why you do what you do and underlining the vital importance of continuing this fight. Thank you so much, Fozzie, for joining us during this extremely busy part in your schedule. We really do appreciate it. If we can be greedy and have just a smidgen more of your time, we have some questions from people. Do you have time to stay with us to answer one or two of those, Craig? Oh, legend. Thanks, mate. I appreciate that. I'll bring David Mann back as well, too. There might be some that'll go to you. Please, if you have a question for Craig or David, just pop them in the Q&A function down the bottom there. We would love to hear your questions. Send them through. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Again, being conscious of time. Yes, Craig. Are you going back to sleep, Craig, or you got to crack on?
I'm straight to sleep. Yeah, I've got a game at like, I don't know, 5 in the morning or something like that.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. My first question is to you, Craig. When you win Father of the Year, what does that do? Like, do your kids have any more respect for you? Are you able to tell them to do exactly what you think because you say, hey, I'm the father? Like, how does that work?
It was so great because I said to them, that's it. It's tools down now, guys. It's tools down. It's up to you. You guys got to take it from here. Sorry, I got the award. Right, I've done my job. And I'm not doing anything any further. You know what they said? They said, sorry, Dad, but the thing is, if you put 1 foot wrong, we're going straight to the meeting. You're in trouble, buddy. So you're going to have to get out there and do the lawn. You're going to have to do that. You know, you're going to have to lift your game on the pizzas, mate, because they're just horrible. And so, yeah, I said, oh, okay, all right. So they basically threatened me. I said, all right, I got to pull my socks up and get a better job done. So they thought it was absolutely hilarious. But the reason I thought, okay, this is, it's a bit kind of odd in a way. I mean, how can you say that, how can you give that award to someone? But it was when they convinced me that it was to amplify the work of an organization that brings fathers and role models, provides them the skills that they very often haven't grown up with, and get in negative cycles of behavior with children around them, and provides them the skills to be present in their children's life. I said, okay. All right, that's good. I'm happy to amplify that, so that's cool.
Legend. All right, but you do need to carry on being a father. Good to know. That's great. Thank you very much for the people who are submitting questions. Here's one for you, Craig. Craig referred, and David would like your thoughts here too. Craig referred to people being held offshore. Some have now been transferred to Australia. What does the future look like for them? Is there any prospect of them being allowed to stay in Australia? How can people get involved in advocating for them? That's transferees. That's people who have been brought here. There are people still in permanent onshore detention or in this kind of limbo. What's the state of play for those folks? What's their future looking like? I'll start with Craig and then come to Dave, please.
Oh, well, let's start with Dave because he knows the specifics and the policy specifics.
Right. Yeah, look, the policy at the moment, the policy remains the same with the current government as it did with the previous government. So it's one area that the current government has said they're not going to change on. And so basically what they're saying is that anyone that was sent offshore, whether they're still offshore in Nauru or in PNG or in Australia, have been brought back. There's over 1,000 people that were brought back for largely Medivac. Basically, the current position of the government is that they will not be allowed to resettle in Australia, but will have to find another country. The options are very limited. The main one at the moment is New Zealand. So New Zealand agreed, after years of it being blocked by Australia, agreed to resettle 150 refugees a year out of the group for 3 years, so 450. That's the main option. The US resettlement deal is almost finished, so there's not many places left, I don't think, and there's a few places potentially in Canada, but basically that's the current position of the government. And yet, people, I think a lot of people from our experience that we're helping have real concerns with engaging, and I think that there's a range of issues such as people having built lives here, Craig mentioned, I'm sure you'll come to this, but Farhad, who we, and others that we've been engaged with. And look, I think there are a range of complex issues. I think at the moment the government is trying to get people to engage with the option of New Zealand, taking up that offer. But the reality is that for many people at the moment, they are in a position where I think they are very resistant, many people. Some are looking at the options, many are resistant for a range of reasons, including that they've built lives here, that they are extremely unwell, some people, and there are others that are very angry with their treatment, the treatment ongoing, the limbo. There's a range of reasons, but I think that is the current policy at the moment. And yet that policy doesn't contemplate flexibility, and it's something that obviously has been urged.
Is there anything you want to add there, Craig?
Yeah, I would say that this current policy stance is a hangover of the last many years, and clearly the current government feels that, or must feel, that there's going to be some type of political cost to allowing the medevac refugees to stay here. I happen to agree with that. I don't think that's right, and I think all of the sector have to be advocating very strongly right now to Andrew and Anthony that is just not right, and that they have a right to stay. We can't, I mean, if some of the people, they have the option to go to New Zealand, that's absolutely wonderful. And we fought for that option to be open to people, particularly from those offshore, many of whom didn't want to any longer come to Australia. They just told us, we just want to get to safety. We want to go to New Zealand. So I'm delighted that was eventually accepted by the former government. However, those who were brought here for medical treatment, weren't provided it, were able to, in I would say almost all instances, or many, had prior relationships and friendships with Australians who had reached out when they were on Manus Island already, and those relationships were actually incredibly important to them, even surviving and getting through the days. And now they've been able to meet those people here. They've finally got people in their lives who care about them. They feel for the first time valued. They don't have the rights that they should have yet under their present visas, which David knows the specifics of more than me, but I know from Fahad and Moz, for example, and therefore it's a tenuous existence, but it's an existence in a place where they have loved people around them who they know for the first time that they have support, and we cannot expect them to uproots again and go and try and create that for a third time, given what we've put them through. It's simply not, it's not humane. So we cannot allow it to happen. And so therefore all of us need to continue to advocate strongly to the Albanese government that this group needs to stay. Now, why is this present government in that situation? I don't know. That's a question for Andrew, but I would say that it's going to take a discussion with Australia. I think those who are willing to need to speak to Australia, including Moz and Farhad, and they do have a film coming out fairly soon, which is really powerful. It's called Freedom is Beautiful. And we need to tell those stories to continue to change that, change that thinking about who these people are. This is a particularly victimized, demonized cohort for purely political reasons, that nothing else. And therefore they're exactly the same as all the others, but they've now been caught as the one group who are still in this political vortex. We need to remove that, I guess, for the present government, to put them in a position where they feel willing to move forward on this. I don't know how long that's going to take, but I am committed to doing that, whether that's privately with all of the MPs in Canberra, across all of the the independents and everyone else, and Labor and the coalition, and publicly, and continuing this fight to make sure that the rights of those people are respected in the same way, in the way that they should be. It really is that simple. It is a big task because of the kind of attacks that had occurred on them over such a long period of time. However, that's too bad. We cannot walk away from this. There has been very significant gains made, and we all acknowledge that all the time. However, this is one area which is wrong, and if something is wrong, then you can't walk away from it. It's that simple.
Refugee Legal has not only fundamentally opposed that so-called no chance policy, that is, if you arrive by boat that there's no chance to resettle, we've not only fundamentally opposed it in word but in action over the years, and people would be familiar with our high court challenges, etc., that are successful challenges, and many other ways. The current situation, I just want to add to it, just from a policy perspective, there is a fundamental incoherence in the policy, because the policy for these people, just while we're on the verge, hopefully, of an announcement very soon of the government making good its commitment to convert people on temporary protection to permanency, these are people who arrived in exactly the same circumstances, and yet, so there's one group in Australia who've been left in limbo for years, who hopefully soon will be actually able to be granted permanent stay here, while another group in exactly the same circumstances really are told you can never remain. And just to add to it too, even if the places, all of the New Zealand places, were taken up to 450, that leaves well over 500 people who have no option at the moment as it stands. So after 3 years, if those places are exhausted, there's still no option for at least 500 other people. So there are big challenges for this government. It's one thing to maintain the policy as if it's the front line of the deterrence agenda, and is somehow necessary in order to maintain border protection policy, etc., and the hard line on that. But it's another thing to actually look at the people's lives as individuals, and people not pawns on a chessboard, as is so often the case with governments, but as people with a heartbeat and lives and relationships who've also been through such terrible ordeals. And one of the things which we've been urging with government is that whether or not people engage in resettlement options that are currently available, and we'll continue to give advice to people if they want that advice, that's it, of course, and to provide good, accurate information, and to urge that there be more given, but also to take an individualised approach to look at people's actual situations and lives. And Craig, you just mentioned exactly some of those situations, to look at people as people, not as pawns on a chessboard. It's so fundamental.
All right, gentlemen, you're both too good at talking, so we're fast running out of time, and we really appreciate your time, and we will move on. I thought I might just finish on, and there's been a few sort of questions on this general subject, just some sort of quickies, and to get your thoughts, particularly around the World Cup, which feels very timely at the moment, Craig, if that's okay. I mean, my first question to you is, like, really, when all was said and done, should the World Cup really have never been awarded to Qatar in the first place? Is that your position?
Well, it shouldn't have been. I mean, it was awarded in a deeply corrupt process. But the problem was then, once it was awarded, it was always going to take a number of years for the FBI to basically get enough. I'm talking about football here, and we're talking about crime scene miniseries, but it took a long time for that to happen. But by Qatar being awarded the World Cup was the first time that human rights organisations were able to move into the world of sport and embed a human rights policy in FIFA. The problem was that they simply haven't lived up to that yet. So that happened 5 years ago, 2017. And at that point, the game should have said, okay, guys, we now got this policy, and we really need to understand what this means. These are the minimum expectations over here. If you can't live up to these, then we're going to have a really serious problem. And they just were not prepared to do that. So the sport and rights movement has been growing since, I think, the 2008 Beijing Olympics, when there was a load of harm around that. And then we saw displacement of people in Rio, in the favelas and so on, in the World Cup and Olympics. And now, and into Qatar. And it's under real threat at the moment because of what's happened there. It is absolutely true to say two things. One is that a lot of the commentary around Qatar, of course, is based on, deep prejudice of the Middle East, of Gulf nations, of the Arabic world and the Islamic world. Of course, that's, I think, obvious. However, that shouldn't be used to then simply, move away from and avoid accountability to all of the issues that we've seen. Many thousands. It's difficult to get a accurate number, but Amnesty believes it's around 6,500 people who died actually building all of the infrastructure for this World Cup. So in many ways, it's been absolutely horrible. And the only way to get something positive out of it is to bring that to life during this World Cup and make sure that the game is going to be held accountable to it. Last night, the Socceroos go and beat Denmark, and then the whole world explodes, and Australia explodes in celebration. And so do I. This is the power of sport. This is why sport is used for soft power. Right? That's the point. The point is that so many countries get to feel what Australia felt today when the Socceroos beat Denmark. That's why you invest over $200 billion to bring a World Cup to your shores, because it obscures, the deeper issues. And it's a challenge when sport is being played to keep those issues at the forefront. I'm committed to try and do so over the next month. But that can be difficult. That's why I was delighted to see someone run on and do a protest with a rainbow flag on it.
Yes, I saw you that. I mean, I'm interested in moments where people are breaking through, or and there was, I think, some pretty unfortunate backdowns from some team members who said that they were, going to wear an armband in protest, and then when they were told they were going to get a yellow card, they go, well, okay, well, don't worry about it. Then they're going to back down. That's pretty disappointing. So I mean, moments of protest or breakthrough that you've seen when people are trying to take a stand and use this platform to say something about human rights. Yeah, so it was good. Someone ran on the pitch the other day and made a protest, which is great. The game itself and players tend to be really disappointing because the political nature and economic nature of global sport is such that everyone is captured. That's the reality. Former athletes, former players have been most disappointing. They're just pocketing hundreds of millions of dollars and absolutely saying nothing. But I have to say the Socceroos have been quite magnificent. And that was because of their local players association, the PFA, which is, I think, easily the strongest in the world, and one of the smallest. But given the historical issues that we've had in Australian football and Australian sport, they've had to advocate for players' rights for the last 30 years. They understand it well. They campaign well, and they educated the Socceroos over the last 2 years. And were able to, and the team was able to get themselves, with the help of the PFA, to a position where they were willing to release a 3-minute, incredibly powerful video where they called for the decriminalisation of the LGBTI community in Qatar and all around the world, and they stood in solidarity with migrant workers. That was phenomenal. No one would ever come anywhere close from any of the other countries. And so Australia should be very proud of that. It's important that our athletes learn this, and that's why I spend a lot of my time today trying to educate the new generation of athletes as to how to talk about human rights, what they are, and when they do that, we've seen with the Socceroos how powerful it is. Yeah. If people haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you seek it out. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions. Thank you for hanging around, Craig. I really appreciate that. I hope you don't mind. We could all keep hearing from you and talking to you about big things for the rest of the night, but we do need to wrap things up. Thank you very much, David Mann. I'm going to hand it over now to Refugee Legal staff member Sally Schmerling to do the vote of thanks, to thank Craig for his time tonight. Over to you, Sally.
Hi, thanks everyone. Mr. Foster, you've delivered an incredibly inspiring and powerful speech, which is no mean feat considering your other commitments at the moment and, of course, being woken from a well-deserved nap. On behalf of Refugee Legal and our guest tonight, we thank you. This World Cup has been a sporting event unlike any other in terms of highlighting the violations of rights of migrant workers in Qatar and the ongoing persecution of the LGBTIQ community there. I'm told the Socceroos were the first team to publicly speak out on those issues, and I've no doubt of your role in that. As refugee lawyers, we stand up for our clients when our government detains and excludes. And so we have the utmost admiration for you, a man who has stood up to the force that is FIFA and other powerful institutions to raise a voice for refugees and human rights for all. As a voice of influence, an ambassador, and advocate, you have refused to remain silent. When Afghan female athletes complained about sexual abuse, you gave your support. When the Taliban took Kabul, you did not waste a moment to lobby to evacuate those facing imminent harm. You have campaigned tirelessly for the release of those detained offshore and onshore in Australia. Mr. Foster, you've changed lives and you've saved lives. You said tonight in your speech that sport provides an opportunity for refugees to be humanised. And on this, I wish to share a very brief memory that I have of visiting a remote detention centre in the desert in WA years ago when unaccompanied Afghan minors were detained. We were there with a team of lawyers. We assisted them to apply for protection. And between their legal appointments, these boys played football on a dusty field with the guards. Separated from their family, locked up, afraid, these boys played the sport with everything they had. I saw them for what they were as they played, kids, just kids. And that is the power and humanity in sport of which you remind us. Mr. Foster, you have used your unique position to inspire a different vision for Australia, a better vision. We thank you for your words this evening, and we thank you for your immense contribution to human rights for refugees and for all. Beautifully said, Sally. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Craig, yes, again, I echo those things. We all do. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Are you still there? My last question is, what do you think is going to happen with the football? If we could focus that for 1 second. Any hot tips that we should be placing money on? How do you think it's going to work out for the Socceroos?
I'm trying to hook in. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, we can hear you.
I'll start my video. Yeah. So well, the Socceroos, it's a really tough one against. Thank you for those lovely comments. I'm not sure I think they're a bit profuse, but anyway, that's the Socceroos. It's a big ask against Argentina, but it's beautiful for Australia to be playing against them. Inspires a new generation of kids, and if that new generation of kids can connect what the Socceroos did in the video to their performances against Denmark and then we're on the right track. That's ultimately what it's all about. When a national team performs and shows humanity, it's incredibly important, because most of sport says, oh, well, you can't do that because it's going to take away from your performances. Right. And there were some concerns from all people all around the Socceroos team, I can tell you now, saying, oh, don't do all this stuff and don't do protests. You just got to train and focus on having the best performances. In my experience, when athletes bring their full humanity and full self to work, they're better athletes. We've seen that across a whole range of sports. Football doesn't do it well. Socceroos have now made that really important connection, and they've crossed that barrier, and now they've created historical work in terms of their performances. That connection is extremely important from my perspective, and we can build on that to create more athlete advocates in future. They've got to take Leo Messi on. Can we get through? Well, it's going to take another miracle, but they've just basically had 3 to qualify and to win the last 2 games. So I'm not to have religious overtones, but I've become a believer in miracles in the last couple of Socceroos performance. We'll see what happens against Leo Messi. The Argentines do feel that he has a divine left foot, however. So I'm not quite sure who's going to get who's going to be shined on more fulsomely, Leo Messi or Australia. Let's find out. 6 a.m. Sunday morning.
Right. Pray hard, everybody. Pray hard for the Socceroos. Thank you again, Fozzie. Great to see you again, mate. And thank you so much for your time. Best of luck.
See you guys. Bye.
Thanks, mate.